Shelley Weisbaum. I'm based in Toronto. I have a master's degree focused on bringing mindfulness education. And for this degree, I actually did human participatory research around the world, going into schools K through 12 in India, Bhutan, Germany, the UK, the United States, and Canada. And in all these places, I was going into classrooms doing workshops with teachers, students, parents, and school administrators around mindfulness. Days of mindfulness, introductions to mindfulness, and exploring how mindfulness could really impact those communities and what that might look like. I'm currently at the University of Toronto completing a PhD focused on bringing mindfulness into healthcare, really continuing this work of what impact mindfulness has on communities. And I'm also faculty at the University of Toronto's Applied Mindfulness and Meditation Certificate program. And I worked for a year previously as the international coordinator for Wake Up Schools, which is Thich Nhat Hanh's initiative to bring mindfulness into education systems around the world. So that's a little bit about me. And now I want to dive into our topic for today, which is, what is mindfulness? Mindful or mindful? And I think probably many of us coming to this webinar today have some ideas of what mindfulness is. Maybe you've experienced it in a yoga class or read a book. And I always think it's nice just to start by thinking about what our own perceptions are of this idea that we're going to explore today. And I love this slide. You may have seen it before, but it's just a great example of what we're kind of starting to talk about, this idea that we could have a mind full of our worries, our fears, a song we heard yesterday where we need to get to, or we could have a mind that's really aware of what's in front of us right now. And so, you know, we can take a moment and you can just think to yourself, how often does your mind look like each of these examples? More often, do you find your mind looking more like the human here, who has it just full of everything that's going on, or do you find that you're often aware of your surroundings and have a clear mind? And I ask this question because mindfulness is both a tool we can apply in our classrooms, but also a wonderful invitation to reflect on our own experiences. So just take a moment for yourself right now, think back over this day. And which of these minds have you had today, the busy mind or the clear mind? Just take a moment. One is not right or wrong. It's not good or bad. Just to kind of let yourself know which of these minds have you been living with today. And before we go any further into our reflection on this topic, I'd also like to find out who's in the room today. So we've set up a poll, just a little bit about our own experience, where we're coming from, which will help me frame this webinar. So I'd like to invite our moderators to put that poll up and to invite all of you participating to add into the poll. And we'll just learn a little bit about the experience of those of us who have joined the webinar today. So it's great. I see the polls are coming in, and so it looks like we're kind of around 20% no experience, 70% some experience, and 11% extensive experience. So welcome to all the different experiences. Like I said, with mindfulness, we're really kind of just becoming aware of what's, you know, around us in the present moment. So it's great to know that we have some people who are just trying this out for the first time, so welcome. We'll definitely have lots of introductions for you, and also if you're wondering, you know, what is this thing I keep hearing about? We're seeing more and more articles about mindfulness. The New York Times has been running a series of them, so it's great to have you here to explore what this is about. For those of you with some experience, I hope that we'll be able to kind of go a little bit deeper, give you some new tools that you might want to test out and some new language. And those of you with extensive experience, I appreciate you being here as support. I look forward to some questions you may have, and also hope that I can give you more language either on the neuroscience side or in practical applications to support the experience that you have. So thank you for participating in this poll. It's great to know who's on the call. And so with that, we'll return to my presentation here. And we'll move on just to start by getting a few working definitions of mindfulness. You know, as I said, mindfulness is about community, and it's also about creating a common language for ourselves to know how to express our emotions, what we're feeling, and also to create that common language with our students, our colleagues, with the parents, and even the whole world that we interface with. Mindfulness gives us this great language. And so to start with these two definitions of mindfulness, the first is from the Plum Village community, which is the international community of my teacher, Thich Nhat Hanh. And that definition is: mindfulness is the awareness of what is happening inside and around us in the present moment. And you'll see I've bolded the word awareness and present moment. And for me, these really stand out as some of the key tools or expressions of mindfulness that we'll run into time and time again throughout the presentation. Awareness, simply being aware of what's happening. Awareness is a word that we all are very familiar with, but we can imagine how much of our day we spend not being aware. Many of you can take a moment to think how often you've lost the awareness that you have a body and realize several hours later you need water, you need to go to the bathroom, and you haven't taken care of yourself. So awareness is really important to mindfulness. It's something we're trying to engage with when we think about awareness for our students. Awareness is also something in neuroscience that we know is directly connected to attention. Attention impacts our ability to learn, take in new information. And so awareness is a very key piece of what we're trying to develop both for ourselves and our students when we do a mindfulness practice. And then present moment is another idea that we're going to return to throughout the presentation. But this idea, awareness of the present moment. So this isn't awareness of the future, which is my mind running away to worries and things coming up and planning. It's not awareness of the past, my mind replaying something or going back to something. It's awareness of the present moment. And specifically when we talk about learning, learning only happens in the present moment. Learning is what is in front of us right now. And so this heightened awareness of present moment is an incredibly useful skill both for learning math and also for handling our strong emotions. The next definition is by John Kabat-Zinn, who's the founder of MBSR, Mindfulness-Based Stress Reduction, a program many of you may be familiar with. And he says that mindfulness means paying attention in a particular way, on purpose, in the present moment, and non-judgmentally. Now we see a few key words that are overlapping here: attention and awareness, present moment. But I really want to highlight this word non-judgmentally. I think this is an absolute foundation for any mindfulness practice. Non-judgment is something that I love introducing to students of all ages. And often when I ask what non-judgment is, the first answer I get is about non-judgment towards others. I shouldn't judge someone by their race or the clothes they're wearing or how they speak. And this actually is almost easier than the other type of non-judgment, which is non-judgment towards yourself. To not judge yourself for how you look or how you're speaking is an incredibly difficult and powerful thing to do. And it's something that awareness of the present moment can help us to practice. And if we've been following some of the articles coming out recently, we have this word in our kind of consciousness right now, microaggressions. And judgment is kind of microaggression that we actually aim towards ourselves all the time. And this can have a huge impact on learning. We're going to get into the neuroscience and the impact that stress has on learning, but just in a fundamental way, when we judge ourselves, do I sound stupid? Do I look cool enough? That person is better than me. We have this huge impact on our cognition and our ability to use our executive function to express ourselves with other people. And so non-judgment is a foundational piece of this. And again, that idea of awareness of the present moment, I'd like to invite you to become aware of whether you have judged yourself today. Just think back. Maybe in the morning you looked in the mirror and judged your hair, what you were going to wear today. Maybe you said something to a colleague earlier and you thought, oh, that wasn't the right way to say that. I'm sure all of you can probably find many times already today that you've judged yourself. I'm probably judging myself the whole time I'm giving this talk, and that's something for me to be aware of. So again, these terms are going to come up throughout the presentation. They apply to ourselves as educators, and they also apply to every single one of our students in terms of their impact on learning, attention. And specifically when we think about students with learning disabilities, we know that there can be a lot of comparison and judgment that they put towards themselves and other students. And so bringing in this concept, making it explicit that we want to practice not to judge ourselves, can really open students' hearts and allow them to feel safer in the classroom and safer to learn. Because if I'm sitting there thinking I'm stupid because I can't read, that has a huge impact on my ability to learn to read. So moving on from these two definitions, as we're kind of going to go into more concrete examples, I just want to give a little overview of some of the items that mindfulness is seeking to address. And when we do our follow-up resource email, we can actually send you research articles that are exploring every single one of these. So these words I've actually pulled directly from published peer-reviewed journal articles. So all of them have some efficacy and rigor behind them. But I'll just do a quick rundown here. So students, we're looking to decrease anxiety, stress, and fatigue, improve emotional regulation, resiliency, self-esteem, and a sense of well-being, build attention and ability to focus, reduce depression. And so these are some of the things that the trials have shown mindfulness interventions can address. And of course, if we know our students, especially those with learning disabilities, we know that there is a really high risk of things like anxiety, stress, fatigue, and depression. And so just in a base way, we know as we move through the exercises today that all of these exercises have been shown to have a really positive impact on these areas. And then our second column here, teachers. Reduce stress, prevent burnout, increase self-compassion, improve classroom management, build and maintain supportive relationships with students, increase a sense of well-being. And so there's some overlap here, as well as some things getting into our classroom management. And again, I really want to stress the importance of keeping in mind both yourselves as educators and your students when we explore the impact mindfulness can have. Because of course we want to support our students, but also in mindfulness, we're very interested in how it supports the teachers themselves. And with that, I'll move on to another calligraphy from my teacher. And this says, the way out is in. And this calligraphy can be explained that in order to take care of others, those outside of ourselves, we need to know how to take care of ourselves. And when we know how to take care of ourselves, we will already take good care of those around us. And this calligraphy is, again, a real invitation, before we get into some of the practical tools that I'm going to introduce later, to begin by looking at how this can impact yourselves as educators. I don't want to give you something extra you have to do every day, but I will say, and I'll give some examples later, that a lot of the educational communities that I work in, when we start bringing mindfulness into those settings, the educators find out that it actually gives them more energy, more time to be there for their students because of how it impacts them. So with that, I'd like to go into our first brief activity here. I'd like to invite you for this activity. I'm going to ask you to imagine something. You can close your eyes, especially if you're sitting with other colleagues. It can be kind of good. If you want to keep them open, that's fine. But I'm going to ask you to take a moment when I ask this question just to see what comes to mind first. The question is, please bring to mind a teacher from your childhood who you really loved. Whoever comes to mind first. And take a moment to just think about what you loved about them. Why did this person just pop into your mind? A teacher who you loved from your childhood. And think of a few keywords if you can, or a sentence. And I'd like to invite us now to actually put these sentences, into the question section. So if you look at your kind of webinar toggle there, you'll see that there's a question section, and I'd like to invite, if you're inspired, just to write in a word or a sentence, why did this person come to mind? What is it that you loved about them? And we'll just kind of take in a few of these answers and see what comes up for all of you on this reflection. I'll just take a moment to look here at the question section. And if you hit reply all, we should be able to have these come in. All right, so I see a few of these coming in now. And it's very nice to kind of just see the words that pop up for people when we think about the teachers that we love from our childhood. You know, it's very interesting. I've actually done this activity and asked this question all around the world. As I mentioned earlier, I was in India, Bhutan, and the UK, and Germany, and the US, and Canada. And what's fascinating to me is anytime that I ask this question, inevitably we hear about who the teacher was. I don't think I've ever heard that someone loved their grade 4 teacher because they taught them multiplication. Usually, you know, we get these words like they listened, they were excited about me, they took time with me. We hear the qualities of who that person was, not the curriculum that they were teaching. And again, I think this is an important place to start, because as educators, it's important to think what our intentions are. who will we be? Will we be in that student's mind in 20, 30, 40, 50 years? And why will they remember us? And again, this isn't to put more pressure on you to have to do more work. We're going to get into some pretty accessible and easy tools that we can start bringing in to look at who we're being in our classroom. But I really want to address what's coming out of the research, which is that who the teacher is such an important component for learning. And we often call this the hidden curriculum in a classroom. And so this is just a little kind of graphic. And what's visible is this tiny bit of the iceberg, which is the formal curriculum. I can walk into the classroom, I can see that a reading class is going on, that a literature class is going on, you know, what I see there right now, what the teacher's teaching. And yet what's hidden, this huge part of what's going on in the classroom, are the interactions with the students, school governance, and classroom management. It's who you are. It's how you respond when a student asks a question. And again, going back to that first definition of mindfulness, awareness of what's happening inside and around us in the present moment. Mindfulness, if all you take away today is to not judge yourself and to be aware of what's happening, that's the start. And what's interesting about the word aware is it doesn't have the word fix or change in it, just awareness. And so mindfulness practice at its core is about starting somewhere to even become aware of this huge amount of hidden curriculum that the students are taking in within our classroom. And jumping off of this, I'll just share a few stats about the importance of relationships. This is from Adele Diamond. She's a wonderful Canadian researcher out of BC. And her research says that what matters most in early childhood education, not the number of children, not the caregiver to child ratio, not having the best materials, but the caring relationship between the teacher and the children. And so again, we know that as educators you're dealing with so much, but it's just raising that awareness of what's really important in our classrooms. So who the caregiver is matters most. This is again from Adele. Across all types of psychotherapy, nothing predicts a good outcome as reliably as the patient's experience of the therapist as being warm, caring, and genuine. And thus the patient's experience of being seen, understood, and helped. And again, just relating this to classrooms, reflecting on, you know, who the caregiver is in that setting, and really understanding the impact of who you are as the educator there, and that this impacts the student's ability to be seen, understood, and helped. And again, relaying this back to LD classrooms, we know that there's a lot of different learning styles and spaces, and so this need for being seen, understood, and helped is really amplified in those spaces. And so sustaining teachers is something that we're really interested in mindfulness. We're saying that there's this huge hidden curriculum. We know that there's so much work and pressure put on teachers. And so I just wanted to share this interesting statistic that came out of the United States National Commission on Teaching in America's Future. And it just says that teacher retention has become a national crisis. And I think this is a really interesting point to start from, because if we're being aware, if that's what mindfulness is, we want to be aware that there is a crisis of our teachers, and that our teachers are a group of people we want to support and take care of. So with that, we're going to shift and go into a little bit of the neuroscience. So with mindfulness, we now have two little working definitions. We're starting to think of words like aware and present moment, and we're going to get into some very practical applications and activities in a moment. But before we go there, I want to take a moment to talk about the neuroscience, because as we learn more about the brain and how it functions, it's becoming an incredible door through which mindfulness has come into education. And if we look at the increase in popularity of mindfulness-based interventions being brought into education, we can see that a lot of it stems from the findings in neuroscience. And recent advancements in the field of neuroscience, particularly from fMRI research studies, which I can talk more about later, we can send some examples if you want, but this is the ability to actually get functional MRIs, which means seeing how people's brains are reacting in real time, have given us a lot of insight into how the brain functions. They've only been around for about 20 years. And understanding these processes can really help us understand where emotional reactions come from. And as you know, you may have experienced this, a student who is just unable to focus in the classroom is having what you might feel is an overreaction to something. They're not able to self-regulate. They're throwing a chair, they're kicking a friend, whatever the outcome is. Having a deeper understanding of really why that's happening from a neuroscience perspective can help you as an educator increase your capacity and compassion, and also that understanding can help your students know what's going on in their brains. So for me, and I love teaching this, I teach about the amygdala and prefrontal cortex to all ages. And here we have an example of both spaces. So you can see on the left there, your amygdala is a tiny part of your brain in the limbic system. It's a very old piece of our brain. It's about the size of an almond, which is what amygdala means. And the amygdala is in charge of detecting a trigger as a threat and initiating the flight, fight, or freeze response, which you may have heard of. And this is a response where basically we have a chemical reaction in our body that's going to get us ready, let's say, from an evolutionary perspective, to fight a tiger in the woods. And so this is a very handy thing from an evolution perspective, because we're going to be able to kind of put all of our executive function offline. I don't need to do multiplication while I'm running from a tiger. I'll be ready to run. But this is not so helpful when we're trying to learn or have an emotionally cognizant response. So you can see on the right-hand side here, our prefrontal cortex, it's right at the front, newest part of our brain. It's in charge of our executive function. It regulates our thoughts, emotions, and actions. And it is directly impacted by the chemicals caused by stress. And so these two parts of our brains are something that we're going to explore a little further. What happens to the brain during a stress response? So as I mentioned, when we perceive danger, our HPA systems releases hormones, and this creates a cascade that actually triggers our fearful response that allows us to be alert at a time of danger. What's interesting about this is the word perceived danger. And I want to take a moment here to pause. Students in our classrooms, and even ourselves, have different things that we perceive as danger. From an evolutionary perspective, what we're trying to perceive is a snake. I see a snake, I need to immediately know that it's dangerous. However, students are actually perceiving things like exams as danger. We're seeing the same hormonal, chemical HPA system release response to sitting down in front of an exam as we are to that snake. And this is where it impacts learning and becomes incredibly difficult. And so the way that it inhibits it is it makes it not associated with deep learning. And also, I love this little quote at the bottom here: you wouldn't try to memorize the times tables if you were being chased by a bear. So of course, if we saw our students running away from an animal, we wouldn't walk up to them and ask them to work on their multiplication tables. But we would ask them to do that if they're sitting in our classroom. And we may not be aware of the stress they're under. They may have perceived danger from another student who's bullying them. They may have a learning disability that's impacting their reading. And when a book is put in front of them, they perceive danger on the same scale as meeting that tiger. They have a full chemical response. Their executive systems are offline. There is no way for them to learn in that moment. And yet we pressure and ask them to. And so again, raising our own awareness of what's going on in students' brains and also sharing this with them can really have a wonderful impact on all of us in the classroom, because when we're aware of it, we're able to respond to it and take care of it. I had a student in grade 3 run up to me one day after recess. And he comes up to me and he says, "Ellie, I'm having an amygdala response." And I was like, "Okay." And he was like, "Yeah, I kicked somebody." And I was like, "Okay, well, what do we do now?" And he was like, "Well, we breathe, and our prefrontal cortex will help us." And I just thought that was such a lovely example of how this awareness can move us from a stress response to an executive function response. So just to summarize up this section, here I have a picture that is explaining the brain hijack. So you'll notice that we have the eye is our example of where our sensory perceptions are coming in. So this is visual stimulus. And that goes into our thalamus, and then normally would continue on back to our occipital lobe, and then compute back up through our brain towards our hippocampus, where we're going to make memories, and then towards the frontal lobe, where our executive function is. And that's kind of, you know, the standard trajectory for visual stimulus that we're going to use to analyze and compute information coming in. But you'll see there's another arrow that goes directly from the thalamus, that's the yellow part, to our amygdala. There's a tiny bit of this information that bypasses the whole system that's going to make a kind of rigorous analysis and just goes directly to the amygdala, so we can immediately decide if there is a danger. And if we perceive a danger, then our HPA system is triggered, our executive functions are offline, this tiny part of our brain has basically hijacked the rest of it because it wants to keep us safe. And so again, as educators, it's very important to understand the brain hijack, to know what's happening when a student is unable to self-regulate, and to be able to communicate with them at that time with this deeper understanding of how much of a difficult perceived danger sense that they're in. And so here we have a slide from Mindful Schools, which is a great program out of Oakland, mindfulschools.org if you want to learn more. And this is just a little graph from them that's going to explain what we're trying to get at with mindfulness in terms of responding to the way the brain is set up. So without mindfulness, we have stimulus, somebody kicks me in the playground, reaction, I kick them back immediately. With mindfulness, we could have the stimulus, someone kicks me, I'm aware of how it affects me. I follow my breathing. I try out one of the techniques that we're about to explore, and then I have a response. I tell them that I don't want them to kick me. I decide to walk away from the situation. So what we're trying to do with mindfulness is move from reaction to response, to give ourselves the ability to bring our prefrontal cortex back online, even if our amygdala has momentarily taken over. And so I like to refer to this as mental fitness. And so we're going to shift now from the neuroscience into how we actually bring this into school settings and classrooms. I like to introduce it as mental fitness because physical fitness is something that really has been understood and accepted by our society over the last several years as something each person needs to do. And also I like it because all of us exercise in different ways. Physical fitness is not just one thing. And yet when we imagine mindfulness, many people just imagine someone sitting silently on a cushion in a room by themselves. And of course, this is an optional way to practice. It's a great way to take care of yourself, but it isn't the only way. Mindfulness really needs to meet students where they are, be fun, and reflect the environment that they're in. And so mental fitness is a great introduction. And I like to ask students and teachers that I work with why we practice things. And when I ask this to students, they often tell me, oh, I practice soccer or dance or piano. And I ask them, why do you practice? And inevitably the answer is to get better. And that's the exact same thing for mindfulness. We practice mindfulness activities, which we're about to try out, to get better, to be stronger. Because if we only apply mindfulness in our classrooms at a time of difficulty, we won't be strong enough to use it. It's like if you were going to play a game of soccer and you hadn't practiced in 8 months or stretched, you'd probably pull a muscle or tear a muscle even on the field as you were running. And mindfulness is a little like that. We want to bring it in at times when our classroom is calm and open, even for ourselves, so that when we hit our big game, that could be for us as educators, we have a promotion or we're worried about whether or not we're going to get bumped because of where we are in our standing at the school. For students, this could be their parents getting a divorce or an exam. We want to be strong enough to be able to mentally support ourselves at those times. So if we're practicing a little bit in an ongoing way, our mindfulness practice will be there with us to help support us in these times of difficulty. So if you're bringing this to your students, it's a great place to start. Ask them what they practice, and then let them know that mindfulness is just like this. It's another thing that's a little different for everyone. Some days we're going to have a better game. Some days we're not. We're not going to judge ourselves. We're just going to start exercising our mental faculties. And so with that, I'd like to introduce us to our first practice. And those of you who have lots of experience will be familiar with these different foundations. I'd like to introduce these 3 foundations for you because today we're going to try them out with a sitting practice, but they can really be applied to many different activities we do throughout the day to make them into mindful moments. And so this is present moment awareness, bell as a reminder to notice, and breath to anchor the mind. And I'm going to go through each of these foundations briefly now so we can kind of get an idea of how they apply to us. So the present moment, we've heard this since the definitions, but I like to introduce present moment to students as this idea that our mind can time travel, which is kind of a fun idea. And it's just this simple idea that our mind spends a lot of time thinking about the future, planning for the future, worrying about the future, or running away to the past, replaying stories, and it doesn't spend a lot of time in the now, which, as we said earlier, is where learning happens. I'd like to invite you now, just think, since I've been talking, have you thought of something coming up in the future or something going on in the past? You're with some colleagues, please raise your hands for each other, but I would expect that 100% of us on the call, including myself, have let our minds wander. And so the idea is that present moment awareness is something that we're actually training for in our mindfulness. We're learning how to let our minds stay in the present moment. This supports us in many ways. It supports attention, focus, and it also supports our ability to notice how we're feeling. Many of you may be like me and sometimes have trouble falling asleep at night because often nighttime is the only time that I actually stop and let my brain settle in my body and tell me what's going on. And all of a sudden I have this flood of thoughts that come in. And so giving ourselves time throughout the day to train to be in the present moment is a very helpful thing. The bell, here's a picture of my teacher, so I like to share it. He's ringing the kind of bell that you'll hear me ring, so now you have an image. The bell can really be any sound that you like to use in your classroom. Some teachers use rain sticks, chimes. The idea of the bell, and you'll hear it used, is simply to have a sound that reminds our mind to come back. Because even during the short activity we're going to try, it's very likely that your mind will naturally run to the future or the past. In fact, if we haven't practiced mindfulness a lot, it's going to happen over and over and over. And so we use a sound to cut through the thoughts and remind us to bring our mind back to the present moment. And so what do we bring it back to? And this is where the breath comes in really handy. We like to say in mindfulness that the breath is the anchor to the present moment. If I am fully aware of my breath, congratulations, my mind's in my body, I'm in the here and now. So throughout this next activity that we're going to try, if your mind runs away to the point where you can't even hear my voice anymore, maybe you're having a busy day, that's fine. I invite you to bring it back to your breathing and then the sound of my voice. So just to recap, what we're going to try out in this activity is we're going to try and bring our minds to the present moment. Then they're going to wander off. The bell will remind us to notice where our mind has gone. Once we notice where our mind has gone, we bring it back to our breathing. That's our anchor, and then, ta-da, we arrive in the present moment. So there's this kind of cycle that we'll go through. And so with that, I am going to invite you to try out our first activity. And it's going to be a very simple 3-minute breathing exercise. And so some goals and outcomes of practical breathing exercises: learning to calm the mind, reducing anxiety and stress. This can help us if we're practicing it in the classroom. If we're out on the playground and we've been doing this for 2 weeks and someone kicks us, we can remind ourselves to go back to this response that we've actually trained ourselves to do. It builds foundation for other mindfulness practices, and it cultivates a sense of gratitude and happiness. You'll see how it does that a little later. So I want to remind you before we go into this activity of a few key things. First off, practice your non-judgment. This means for yourself. Your mind is definitely going to wander even though we're trying to keep it present. And instead of getting angry at your mind wandering, if you notice your mind wandering, I'd like you to congratulate yourself on this very happy moment because you've become aware. And then see if you can bring it back. This is really the weightlifting part of this exercise, not perfectly emptying your mind and levitating, but actually learning how to notice when it wanders and getting it to come back. So your goal is to see if you can keep your mind in the present moment, but your hidden curriculum goal is to not judge yourself when it goes away and bring it back. And you can also practice not judging the activity. You might be like, why am I doing this? This is a waste of my time. That's totally fine if those thoughts come up. Again, notice them, become aware, come on back to your breath. And so with this introduction now, I'd like to invite you to find a comfortable position. We're going to close our eyes, or if you're not comfortable closing your eyes, you can pick a spot to look at, but I encourage you to close them because it helps remove, again, one of those sensory stimulus that's coming into our bodies that we're analyzing. And a comfortable position is any position that you feel like you won't need to move from for 3 whole minutes. You might like to take a moment to wiggle in your chair and just check how your back feels. Take a moment to notice where your shoulders are. You want to be upright and stable without feeling stressed. So, you don't have to judge how perfectly straight your back is. Just make sure that it's comfortable and stable. You might like to put both your feet on the floor. You can cross your legs if you like. Most importantly, please put down anything you're holding that you might fidget with. I find if my cell phone is even in a back pocket that it's going to be pulling my mind away. So you might just take a moment, clear your space, close your eyes. We're going to do this 3-minute breathing exercise. And this is, again, an opportunity for you to just experience what a mindfulness practice looks like. Remembering the foundations of the sound as reminding us to come back, our breathing as the anchor if our mind is running away. And throughout this activity, I will be guiding you using key words for you to focus on. So take a moment to settle in, close your eyes. We're going to start with the sound of the bell, and I invite you to allow it to cut through whatever busy thoughts you have and invite your mind to try and rest on the sound of the bell, beginning to arrive in the present moment fully, stopping running to the future or the past. Breathing in, I become fully aware of my entire in-breath, noticing it entering my lungs and filling my belly. Breathing out, I become fully aware of my entire out-breath, Breathing in, I can focus on the word in. Breathing out, I can focus on the word out. In, out. Breathing in, I notice if my breath is becoming deeper, not forcing it to change, just bringing my full attention. Breathing out, I become aware if my breath is becoming slower. Breathing in, I can focus on the word deep. Breathing out, I can focus on the word slow. Deep, slow. Breathing in, I invite my mind to feel the calmness of this moment, where I have nowhere to go and no one to manage. Breathing in, breathing out, I invite my body to feel fully at ease in this moment. Breathing in, calm. Breathing out, ease. Calm, ease. Breathing in, I invite my mind and body to fully arrive in this present moment, letting go of any thoughts that are rushing in to pull me away. Breathing out, I touch the qualities that make this a wonderful moment, a moment where I can be with myself and I have nowhere to go and nothing to do. Breathing in, present moment. Breathing out, wonderful moment. With the next sound of the bell, we'll allow our minds to come back from wherever they are, resting fully on the sound and spending one more moment with ourselves and our breath. And with that, I'd like to invite you to open your eyes, take a moment to come back to the space that you're in. Sometimes it's helpful to rub your face a little, stretch your arms. And then before we continue, I'd like to invite you to take a moment to reflect on your own experience. I like to say that mindfulness is a great opportunity to collect some data on ourselves that we might not otherwise have. And here are some questions that's a good place to start. What's going on in your body right now? Does it feel any different than before we started? And the same question for your mind. Does your mind feel the same or different? Are you calmer and slower, or are you tight and anxious? And again, without judgment, you may have enjoyed that, you may feel at ease, or it may have been really uncomfortable for you and you want to get up and run around, or maybe you even did take a moment to go get a water. Again, all of that is fine, but just take a moment to become aware for yourself. What are some key words you might use to describe the experience you just had with us? It's very interesting just to reflect. Sometimes myself as a long-term practitioner, I have days where a mindfulness breathing exercise just is so calming and easy, and others where it's quite difficult. And for me, again, this allows me to become aware. It may allow me to know that something is still bothering me from a few days before that I haven't taken care of properly. If there's one idea that just kept pinging into your mind, dragging you away, you may like to let yourself know that there's something you need to take care of. And the same thing with students. This is a great opportunity for them. I get a lot of feedback from young people that this is very calming, it's centering, it's something they can use outside of the classroom when someone is bullying them or if they're having a fear about a test. If we do this just for even 3 minutes at the beginning of our day, after a transition, after recess, it's a great way to have everyone fully arrive. But for ourselves and our students to know that sometimes becoming aware of how we feel actually makes us realize that we feel very tense and stressed. And so that's always I don't know if the risk is the right word, but it's just an implication that we shouldn't assume everyone will just feel great after a meditation, that we are open to the meditation simply allowing us to know how it is we are feeling. And so you might want to jot down a few of your words or just allow them to be kind of there. And then I'm going to move in now to some strategies for bringing this to our classroom. So hopefully we've gotten a bit of the definition, some of the foundations we're applying, and also why we're doing it through the neuroscience to become aware of how we're feeling, address stress, anxiety, and to allow our executive functions to be online. So strategies for the classroom. Again, I've talked a little bit about how we introduce this, going back to mental fitness, what we practice. And another word that I really like to bring in is mindfulness as experiment. Because experiments are things that we do to observe and collect data, not necessarily something we do to have an answer right away or fix everything. And this is really important. We read a lot of articles about mindfulness and reducing anxiety. Well, it doesn't do that if we just do it for 3 minutes one time. It's really an ongoing practice. And again, like I said, sometimes we do it and we feel like it works so well because we feel better. And sometimes we may feel like it failed because we actually feel worse. And from a mindfulness perspective, it's an experiment. Both of those are successes. And this is another thing for ourselves and our students in terms of classroom management. We want to allow everyone to feel successful. We don't want mindfulness to be another thing that's impacting our LD classroom as something that we're going to fail at. And so allow everything to be a success. Because in an experiment, anything that we observe is successful. When I work with grade 7, 8 boys, they're always falling off their chairs when we do a mindfulness practice. And they look a little cheeky and tell me, oh, I guess I didn't do it right. And I tell them, well, did you find out that you couldn't pay attention? And they say, yes. And I say, fantastic. That was a successful experiment. So this language is really useful to us. Another thing that we can do is to create a glitter jar. And I'm just going to switch for a moment so you can see me for the first time and also check out my glitter jar. And so here we go. We're going live. Hello, everybody. Nice to see you for the first time. So this is my glitter jar, and I'll go back to the instructions of how to make it in a moment. And so just to show you here, what the glitter jar does is basically water. I do it in plastic, so it's easy to bring it into the classroom. And if we shake it up, it can become a great example of what our mind looks like when we're stressed or angry. We cannot see through. The water is damp and unclear, and we can't make sense of what colors there are. And yet, if we start breathing and we allow our mind to settle, this is a visual example of what happens during a mindfulness practice. the water settles, the sequins settle, we can see clearly through, to our hand behind it. And so something like the glitter jar is a great technique because, and let me just switch back here to my screen mode, it allows us to have a visual example of what's going on in our minds. It's a nice thing to use as an introduction. I also find I've worked in some autistic classes or classes where students have focus, different areas of focus, and this can be a great thing to use as a focus for the meditation. So if we're not able to sit there with our eyes closed, we can actually have a glitter jar, one per student or one that the class uses. We shake it up to imagine our busy mind, and then we set it down on the table in front of us, and we breathe as the sequence settles. And so we don't have to use keywords. Sometimes a sound can be disturbing, a loud, sharp sound. And so the jar is another option for where we can focus our attention, link it to our breathing, as always, the foundations. Mind in the present moment, the jar is in the present moment. If we're focused on the jar, we're in the present moment. Once we feel calm with the jar, we link our breathing to the sequence settling, and now we're arriving fully in the here and now. And you'll see on here, please take note, to make these jars, it's very important to use 50% water and 50% glycerin, which you can get at any drugstore. And it just makes the water a little thicker so that the settling happens in that very kind of nice controlled way instead of everything just falling to the bottom. You can use glitter. I prefer sequins because they're a bit bigger and they kind of work better, but that's a great strategy for the classroom. Another is to take the same foundational practices and apply them to what we call a body scan. I like to do the body scan lying down if you can. It's very nice, but also especially in classrooms where students might want to kick their neighbors, I often, especially with the teenagers, will do arms crossed, head down on the desk. And what we do with the body scan, those same ideas, we introduce the concept of the present moment, the bell or our noise to cut through, the anchor of the breath. And then as the person guiding it, we simply move through our bodies. And so we focus on our forehead, then our eyes, then our nose, then our mouth. And each place we come to, we take a moment to invite it to relax and be calm. It's a beautiful way to take care of our bodies. It also, again, gives another point of focus for the people who are meditating because they're focused on their own bodies. There are scripts online that you can get if you look up body scan. I personally like to just do it across myself. I don't need a script. I just move through my own body. If you're working on a biology unit or you want to bring in the different muscles, you can get into those. So really you can play with this if you're doing a body recognition unit with the younger students, awareness, whatever the language is that you're using in your classroom, you can simply apply to this. And as I mentioned before, sometimes in an ADHD classroom with students who have autism, I find it's very helpful too, again, to have an extra level of contact to put their focus and attention to. So we can actually practice touching our eyes. We breathe and we relax our eyes, touching our nose. And so we move our hands down our body as a way to have contact be part of the focus for our attention. When I did my human participatory research in India, I actually worked with 900 students at a school. And I gave them a questionnaire survey afterwards to find out what they enjoyed most. And I thought I'd make some fun graphs so you could see what different activities were the favorites. But I didn't get to make any fun graphs because 100% of the 900 students answered that the body scan was their favorite practice. They liked, we did songs, we did sitting meditation, we did walking meditation, eating. You can bring the foundations to whatever you like. But this was the absolute favorite. The response was that taking this time to calm their bodies allowed them to be more focused afterwards. It actually rolled out into their evenings. They were nicer to their siblings when they just took this time during the day to just stop for 10 or 15 minutes. I was in a grade 3 classroom in Toronto, and it was my last session of 3 workshops I was doing with the students. And I was going to do a sitting meditation because I didn't think we had time to lie down. And I told them this, and they rebelled on me. They said, quick, if we lie down, she'll have to do the body scan. And they lay down. They said, don't kick your neighbors or she won't start. And so, of course, I had to offer it. And that's just an example, again, of how powerful these exercises can be. It can seem so simple, just going through the body and telling it to calm and relax. Why do I need to do that all the time? But in fact, it has this huge cascading impact on ourselves, on our ability to learn, and bringing our executive functions online. So these seemingly simple tools can actually have a really big impact on the community. If we think about it, the student who went home that night and talked nicer to their sibling probably also was speaking nicer to their peers and their colleagues. And when we think about building community, communication, how we listen and how we act is impacted by our thinking. Our thinking is impacted by our stress. Our stress is impacted if we're not taking any time in the day to take care of ourselves. And so that's the kind of full loop. So with that, I'm going to move into some summary notes for you and then some resources, and then we'll have time for some Q&A, which I'm always excited about. So summary notes, happy teachers will change the world. If you take nothing else away, thank you for taking the time to be here today. And please take some time for yourself because we know that who you are impacts the classroom. Mindfulness, the word's awareness and not judgment. The way out is in. Taking care of yourself naturally takes care of those around you. If you don't have time to bring in a breathing activity this week, just know that if you take a moment to breathe yourself over breakfast, you are already bringing it to your classroom. Neuroscience, remember the amygdala is the fight or flight brain hijack, takes our executive functions offline, and again, the amygdala causes reaction. The prefrontal cortex, when it's online, allows us to respond. We want to move from reaction to response. Activities to take with you today, we have the reflection activity, noticing where your favorite teacher, the qualities you remember is a beautiful thing to do with your colleagues even, it's very inspiring. The 3 foundations, present moment, bellow, sound, and breath. Again, you can apply these in creative ways to experiment with how you walk, how you get ready for recess, what you do before an exam. They can be applied to all ages and all levels. And then the mindfulness activity, again, is a keyword focus activity. We can begin and end with the sound of the bell or a sound of your choice to kind of bring the focus in, applying the 3 foundations as a way just to come back to yourself. Really great for transitions and a great place to start testing this out with the class before you apply it to other activities. Applying mindfulness at work, there's this great phrase, disconnect to reconnect more fully. Tons of the literature shows that even taking 1 or 2 moments, 3 breaths, will change the way that we're interacting with one another. So it doesn't have to take too much time. And take a real break. Stop your mind from running the same stories. Many of us say we're taking a coffee break, and yet during the coffee break, we spend the whole time planning the next thing we're going to do. That means you didn't actually have a break. You physically might have not been in the classroom, but your brain was time traveling to the classroom. If you can, say for the first 3 sips of coffee, I'm going to do nothing but think about this coffee in my breath and see if it has an impact on you. The washroom is also a great place to practice mindfulness. Don't get on your phone and check your emails. Don't check your Facebook. Take that moment for yourself because probably no one's going to bother you there. And that's this idea of daily bells of mindfulness. Set something in your life to remind you just to check in with yourself for a minute. I know someone who sets from the parking lot to her school's front door an intention to not arrive at the school before she gets to the front door, to notice her steps and her breath the whole walk up, and she arrives in a different way. And you can share with your colleagues and students by playing around, introducing mental fitness, that this is an experiment, we're collecting data, we can try sitting meditation, and different things like that. Some resources for you today, and again, these slides will be sent out. The Mindfulness and Educators Network was started in the States. It's a great place to share with other teachers that are interested in this, other educators, get resources. The Applied Mindfulness and Meditation Certificate Program at the University of Toronto is also a great place if you're wanting to go a little deeper. You can take any of the courses as a one-off, one-standing course, or if you want to get a full certificate in this, you can also do that. It's through the Continuing Studies program, which means each course is offered in 2 full-day modules, either on the weekends or in the evenings, so it's very accessible for those who are working. The Mindful Society Conference takes place at the University of Toronto every spring. This is a chance to do a deep dive into the neuroscience and education and best practices for applying this in different spaces. And the American Mindfulness Research Association. If you're interested in reading further articles around the research that's coming out around the brain, how stress impacts it, the impact that mindfulness has on it, to learn more about clinical and in-school intervention trials, there's fantastic articles all across this website. And finally, for myself, if you want to connect further, and we'll have some time for questions now, my website's at the bottom there. I am always happy to answer questions if you're trying something out. I had a teacher write to me a few weeks ago about putting a couch in the middle of her classroom and having the kindergarten kids practice mindful walking around the couch silently. And then we were like experimenting on how this might be expanded to other parts of the physical therapy that she was doing with them. So I'm always happy to reach out to me. And then these are 2 courses that I have coming up that I thought is particularly applicable to education. One is Mindfulness for Reconciliation and Conflict Management, and the other is Building and Broadening Resiliency, Integrating Mindfulness in Education, which is a 2-day module where we basically go through many different activities, how they apply to you, how they apply to the classroom, and then also looking at some of the curriculum that's coming out through the Ministry of Education and how this connects to their kind of well-being mandates and how we can support each other as colleagues and students to have well-being. And so with that, we'll get to my final slide, which is the last calligraphy that I just like to end on. Just an invitation from my teacher to be beautiful and be yourself. And so thank you for listening, and I look forward to diving into our Q&A together. And so with that, I'll turn on my video so you can see me, and then I believe our moderator will take over to moderate our Q&A.
Yes, here I am, Ellie. I'm back. So I just wanted to say, first of all, thank you so much for providing us all with an opportunity to deepen our understanding of mindfulness and for those great exercises. If anyone has any questions, you can either click the raise hand button on your control panel and we will unmute you and you can ask a live question, or you can type your question into the chat box on your dashboard and I'll read your question to Ellie. So we actually do have one question that's come in. And the question is, for how long can I do a body scan with grade 1 and 2 students?
Fantastic question. And so this is a great area to look at because depending on our classroom, we may want to really think about how much time any mindfulness activity can realistically be enjoyed. With usually elementary grades, I keep a body scan to 10 to 25 minutes. I actually find that 25 minutes is quite approachable for that age group because we're so focused on each part of our body. The first time I might try for 10 or 15 minutes. Also, if you notice that someone's getting really restless, you can set up some kind of tools. You can say, okay, if you're not able to sit still and I come over and tap you, you're going to go sit at your desk quietly. So you might want to put some things in place. But I wouldn't hesitate to go even for 25 minutes if you have the time. I wouldn't recommend doing less than 10 minutes because it's a little hard to actually get into the practice. If you only have 5 minutes, I'd try doing more of a breathing exercise at the tables. And definitely, especially with the younger grades, but even with the older grades, set up some boundaries and rules around bothering your neighbors. It can be really nice to set this up as a way to support one another. Even if we can't be still, we can be still for our friends. And again, just set up some rules about how we move from the desk to lying down if we're doing that, how we're going to put our heads down on the desk. And most importantly, as the moderator or the facilitator for body scan, I always walk very gently around the room. So if people do open their eyes, they see that I'm coming around. And when someone looks up at me, I just smile to them. And often, okay, that's enough. Some people just need to check that other people's eyes are closed and then they close their eyes again.
Okay, great. So we have quite a few questions coming in, so this is great. Do you have any strategies for practicing mindfulness with students with autism?
Yes, so great question. And again, we really want to allow mindfulness practice to meet students where they are. Again, I found with autistic students that often ringing a bell, this was my bell that I was ringing here, the sound can be a little bit disturbing. So if I am going to bring in a sound that we're going to hear when our eyes are closed, it's really important to introduce everyone to the sound, maybe even invite them to practice ringing it a few times so they get used to it. So I think, as all of you know as educators, every student, whether they have it's an LD classroom or not, needs their own techniques. So for me, again, with autistic classes, really letting the students explain the activities back to me before we try them, make sure they're on board, that we've all agreed on what it's going to be, that we've all listened to the sound with our eyes open if we're going to hear a sound is really important. And again, the tactile piece, so if we're moving through our bodies, as we relax our eyes, we're touching our eyes. As we relax our face, we're touching our face. I find that that's really, really helpful. And also, I find that it's really nice if we have the capacity, the cognition capacity, to share about the mind. I find students who have an LD or are, struggling with emotions are really interested in why this is happening. And so sharing about the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex can be a really great thing to do with these students.
Okay, fantastic. Thanks, Ellie. The next question is from Debbie. How do you suggest introducing mindfulness practice into a large high school?
So again, another great question. You are tapping on the questions I think that are at the forefront of what the research is looking at and every school that I've been to in the world. So bringing mindfulness in a larger environment is a great thing to do. I mean, the more classrooms that it's in, the more the calm, the ease, the techniques can roll out across the school. I'd say for a big school environment, we often find that schools have, one or two what I would call champions in them that are interested in bringing this in. And so there's a few ways that you can do this. One is just go easy on yourself, start in your classroom, see what works. Often we find that your colleagues will start noticing or hearing about it from the students and get curious. So starting with yourself and your classroom is a great place to start. If you want to go beyond this, I would say discussing with your administration, showing them this video or some research around what impacts mindfulness can have can be a really great way to start getting that buy-in, especially what we know about resiliency and self-regulation. If we get enough buy-in that we want to actually have a workshop for the whole school, there's a lot of us in Toronto, many of us who teach at the AMM program at U of T that do introductory days of mindfulness. I'm actually going to a high school this Friday to do 1 hour in the morning for their PD day to do an introduction. And it can help to have someone like myself or someone else from our program kind of come in who's not you, can do the explanation for an hour, sit with everyone, and kind of get the ball rolling. There's also a number of programs. One is called Mind Up, Mindfulness Without Borders, that exist in Toronto that do mass trainings for schools. So there's resources kind of out there for you depending on what level you want to bring it to. And again, you can take my course or other courses where you can get a little bit deeper and you can even run workshops for your school. So there's many different ways to experiment and play with bringing it in, and I just suggest that you check your own energy and then you can help us change the world.
Okay, next question. Other than breathing activities, how can we help teens with test anxiety or general anxiety about school?
Yeah, so yeah, and the breathing techniques, you know, it's funny, they can sometimes seem separate, but it is truly incredible how much a breathing practice can help with that anxiety. The next piece, and I get into this in my course, is actually going into some emotional regulation activities. So starting to have reflections on how we feel doing journaling. So there's a ton of techniques out there. I can't get into all of them now, but I would recommend the Mind Up curriculum has some great resources that you can buy through Scholastic. And then again, taking this present moment awareness once we breathe, and especially with teens, adding a journaling component after a breathing technique. Okay, collect the data on yourself. You might choose each day. They might decide, are you feeling, anxious, happy? Give them some language to start journaling what their feelings are once they collect it, because often we don't know till we stop. And so pairing a breathing technique with an actual awareness writing activity can help to even raise the awareness even more. And at the end of the week, we can actually look back at that journal and discover how we've been feeling all day, because it's incredibly important to know this. And often teenagers aren't actually aware of how they're feeling all week. I mean, as adults, we're not aware of how we're feeling all week. But it's very important to raise this awareness, because if we know we're feeling stressed, then we can actually make choices that will help us reduce that anxiety. Often also in high school, we find out a lot about teasing, talking behind each other's backs. And so I had a group of teenage girls discover that they were feeling upset all week because of how they were talking about each other. This was a group of friends. They had no idea about this, so we did the journaling exercise. Once they had an idea, we were able to discuss ways that they might reduce the amount of talking that they were doing about their friends.
Okay, our next question, I'm not sure if this is kind of something that's in your wheelhouse and you have a response to, so we'll give it a shot and see what happens. I teach core French, and I'm thinking of doing this with my intermediates. I'm wondering if I should start doing the exercises in English and move into French. Just curious how the second language factor might affect the practice.
Absolutely. So again, starting where the students are, if you feel like you have one class that has a good handle on the language, then of course dive right in. But also, this is a great example of a way that we can play with mindfulness practice to actually integrate with what we're already doing in the classroom. So if there's a set of language skills that you're currently working on, you might want to make those the key words. If there's some way to actually bridge learning a language, becoming comfortable with it, and a relaxation thing, that's a win-win. So I would definitely say with learning languages, because we're only focusing on one keyword at a time, that we can actually integrate this into the learning we're doing in the classroom, and that those words, if we're listening to them with our breathing, will actually become things we know really well and actually feel more at ease with. So I would definitely encourage you across all the different learning that you're doing to try and weave it in. If you think there's a class that doesn't have a handle on all the words you're going to use, definitely do a lesson beforehand to make sure everyone's comfortable, but I think it would pair up very nicely.
Okay, great answer. So our next question, I'm going to unmute Lisa Ann. Can you hear us? And is your microphone working? Hello? Lisa Ann? Oh, I think we lost her. Okay, all right, that's okay. I have her question here in print, so we'll just do that instead. What strategies or tips would work with high school age students?
Yes, so of course, coming back again to really meeting students where they are. And so I think a great thing for buy-in, just like the buy-in we started with today with all of you was reflect on a teacher that you loved. And all of a sudden, you could hear those qualities. And so maybe you're starting to think about how you cultivate those qualities in yourself. I think with high school students, buy-in, having them want to do the activity for themselves is incredibly important. And so you know your classroom's best, but one technique I often do is I start asking, like, does anyone in here feel anxious or stressed about anything? And everyone's like, I'm like, okay, well, what is it? And so we start to kind of come up with some lists around what's going on in the classroom. And then I say, like, okay, cool. So we know that we're worried about exams. Who here would like to try out an activity that might help your heart beat slower before an exam? And so to really start with their buy-in, and then again, introduce it as an experiment. So once we try it, say, who loved it? Who hated it? And again, this tool of non-judgment is really interesting because it plays out across everything that we do. And so as the teacher is starting to model, like, that's totally fine that you hated it. Isn't that interesting? Starts to, like, there'll be some laughter. There's like, oh, wow, yeah, how I feel is okay. And it starts to kind of break down some of the self-judgment that plays out into all the aspects of teenage life. And so again, introducing it as an experiment, asking the students where they are, getting them to convince you why they need these techniques is the best place to start. And have fun with it. I think, all of us take a lot of things really seriously. This is another place that our judgment comes in. And if the students sense that we're like, you need to breathe, then, everyone else gets tense. And so I think a sense of playfulness and coming together to look at these things. Also, as an educator, sharing with the students how you feel. I'm really stressed. I have so much to do today. That can be like amazing for high school students that, the adults around them are human beings too. And so there's all different kinds of quite simple ways that this can really come in and start transforming our classrooms, how we feel about ourselves and how we feel about each other.
Okay, our next question. One concern I would have for general classroom use would be possible negative reactions, such as bringing back trauma memories, a child being worried because they feel like they're dizzy or floating. Is there anything that you could offer on this?
Yeah, absolutely. And a great thing to be aware of. Like I said at the beginning, mindfulness is not a fix-all, and it also doesn't result in everyone feeling wonderful and like fluffy kittens right away. And so we do want to think about what this means to bring in. A great technique for that is to set up with students beforehand the non-judgment and expectation that this may make them realize that they're tense or worried or fearful, and that this is totally okay. One thing that heightens our anger or fear is being angry that we're angry, or being fearful that we're fearful. And so again, the playfulness, the experiment, the fact that there's no one right way to do this and that you are not judging them as their teacher is an excellent place to just reduce anything that may come up. Now, it may come up anyway. If you have a classroom where students are struggling with anger issues or anything that may be more extreme, and of course, everyone's struggling with these all the time, but if you specifically have a concern, you may want to have a second body in the classroom where students know if they're uneasy that they can get up and walk out of the classroom with that person can go over and take some care of them. So yes, please know your classroom. Set up the expectations, which is to not have any. That will help reduce anything that comes up. And then also always do a debrief with the students, let them know how their feeling is okay. And for yourself, know that there may be times where a student is triggered, and know what your resources are in the school if someone's triggered, if you don't have a second body in the classroom. So set up the parameters for yourself to be safe, what you'll do if that happens, and then also for your students. If you're nervous, if your eyes are closed and you start feeling dizzy or floaty, open your eyes, focus on a space. If your face is itchy, right, we're trying to be calm, but we're not trying to sit here in pain. So we often say, do the movement with mindfulness. If you need to itch your face or open your eyes or move your body, do it just as slowly and mindfully as you can, so we can demonstrate, I need to itch my nose. I know I'm itching my nose. I've stopped itching my nose. My eyes are closed and I feel dizzy. I'm going to open my eyes. I have opened my eyes. I know that I'm okay. So just set up some kind of tools for yourself and your students before you dive in, especially if you know that someone in the classroom might be nervous about it. I have also worked in classrooms, if we have like a mixed classroom where we have different kind of backgrounds and needs and learning places. I've asked certain students whether they want to sit at their desk if we're doing it on the floor. I've had students say it's scary to think about their breathing, so we focus on their heart. I had a student who was autistic, who really just wanted to focus on her cat. Her pets were something really safe for her. And so when I would tell the students to focus on their breathing, she knew that was the time to imagine her cat and to focus on her cat. So definitely be aware and communicate with yourself and your students.
Okay, great. So we have time for one last question. So the question is, I'm wondering if we should notify parents before starting a mindfulness program in the classroom, just thinking of diversity for different families that may have religious beliefs or just anyone in general that prefers a no meditation or less spiritual approach to self-regulation. What options could be available to those students whose parents prefer they not participate in mindfulness?
Yes, another great question. You're all really hitting all the hot topics for mindfulness practice. So just to begin with, there are a diverse set of communities, and really anything we do in the classroom may or may not work for all of our families. So we want to be aware of this. I don't necessarily think, and again, it really depends on your school. You might want to check with your administration that there needs to be a permission slip for this, but you might be in a school that does need that. So again, start with where your community is. Communicate as you feel necessary. For me, mindfulness really is a secular practice. Going back to like the roots of where it comes from, there isn't a God. It may be spiritual for some people, but that's really something that we're adding on top of these kind of basic practices that are really based in breathing techniques, in emotional regulation. So for me, it is a really great tool if we're working in a very diverse community, because it is quite safe to practice with whatever other practices are in your classroom. So I'd start there as in terms of giving an explanation. I also will send out a link to Discover Mindfulness, which is a resource that I didn't have on my resources slide. Sorry about that. We'll send it out. That has some great fact sheets about mindfulness and what it does in the classroom, where it's coming from, the secular nature of it, the neuroscience. So using a fact sheet to kind of explain this so that you don't have to do the explanation yourself can be really helpful. Again, having someone like myself or from the AMM University program come in to meet with your administrators or teachers or colleagues or parents can also be really helpful. So we're here to support you if you need. I do a lot of evenings of mindfulness practice with parents at schools, which is really beautiful because everyone starts developing this common language. So again, just like with how do we introduce it to the classroom, how do we bring it to our school, is really about knowing your community, knowing what's safe, not stepping on people's toes, but also I think you can be quite confident in the fact that this is a secular practice, that it is coming into the programs, and that those of us that are bringing it in are, again, coming from this place that's very accessible to all different communities. One thing you may need to address if you have a diverse classroom is students may have an idea of what mindfulness or meditation practice is that comes from their traditions, and so you may want to open the floor for some conversations about that to make sure everyone feels safe. So again, awareness of what's happening inside and around you, what support your community needs, and if your administration feels like you do need to send home a little note about it, again, I would just think about what the buy-in is. So bring in some of these words that we're trying to address, like self-regulation and resiliency, share some of the neuroscience, and definitely for parents who are interested, give them some of the articles if they want to read about the interventions. So this is here to support you. Again, in the course I teach, it's all about just developing the language to communicate it, so if I can be of support, definitely let me know.
Okay, great. Thank you, Ellie. So that's all the time we have for today, and we're going to have to end our question and answer session at this time. For those of you who didn't have your question answered, we will ensure that it does happen, and if you have further questions, you can either email us at info@ld@school.ca or send us a tweet to at @ld@school, and again, we will ensure that everyone's questions get answered. So on behalf of everyone here on the LD at School team, I'd once again like to thank Ellie for her presentation, and thank you to all of you, our participants, for joining us. Please remember that we'll be sending out presentation slides as well as a short survey following today's webinar, and the feedback we receive through this survey provides us with important information for producing future webinars, so please do take the time to complete it. We'll also be sending out a link to this recorded webinar in approximately 3 weeks. So thank you again to everyone for participating in our first LD at School webinar of the year, and have a wonderful day.